The Need for Compassion, a reflection by Father Paul Galetto. This is a homily for the fifth Sunday of Lent in year C, 2022. During my 40 years of working in education, I have rewritten many handbooks, student handbooks and employee handbooks. I love rewriting handbooks. It's like cleaning out a closet or an attic or a garage. You find so many rules and regulations, and you wonder why they are still there. Some go back to the 1950s. Some because one student did one thing and now every other student had to pay the price for it. And so in rewriting handbooks, you have to know the history of the rules that are there and to keep what is good and discard what is bad. If we want to understand today's gospel, we need to go back to the time of Moses. Moses is the one who brought the Hebrew people out of the land of Egypt. And when they left Egypt, they needed their own laws because they were no longer subject to the laws of Egypt. And so what Moses gave them were the Ten Commandments, which were basically just tribal law. They were the fundamentals of coexistence. So the Ten Commandments make common sense. Take a day of the week to rest and to thank God for the blessings of your life. Be sure to honor your parents. Do not kill. Killing destroys the sense of community. We must find ways to resolve the difficulties in our communities. Do not steal. Nothing destroys trust like stealing someone else's goods. Do not lie. How can you build relationships if you lie? Do not commit adultery. Adultery has always destroyed communities, and most importantly, families. And the Jewish people thought that adultery was such a severe offense that those who committed it should be stoned. And that's where we find ourselves in today's gospel. Jesus is in the temple area and is teaching his followers about forgiveness, about compassion. And while he's doing this, the Pharisees and the scribes bring to him a woman who has been caught in the act of adultery. And so they ask Jesus what should be done. Should they follow the Mosaic law? Should they stone her to death? If Jesus said yes, then he would look like a hypocrite when teaching about compassion and forgiveness. He would also be going against Roman law because only the Romans had the power to sentence someone to death. If he said no, then they would question what kind of a rabbi was he if he wouldn't follow the Mosaic law. Jesus was no fool. He immediately knew that something was wrong here. Just as it takes two to tango, it takes two to have adultery. Where was the man who was involved? Why wasn't he brought also to be stoned? Maybe he was the son of an official in the Roman or Jewish faith. Maybe he was someone who had privilege and escaped. And so here was this woman, and Jesus decides to not say anything. He writes on the ground, and he makes the people think, and he says, the one who was without sin should cast the first stone. One by one they left. Jesus did not condemn her, nor did he condone her actions. What he did was he offered compassion. Compassion is always the right response in any situation. About 6 years ago, I went to work down on the Texas-Mexican border. The issue of immigration was a hot topic and still remains a hot topic. I went to McAllen, Texas, and worked at the Humanitarian Respite Center, which is run by Sister Norma Pimentel. She is a saint. She had put this together all on her own and survives on the charitable donations of many people who try to help their fellow human beings. In my time at the Humanitarian Respite Center, I would say that well over 80% of those who came in were women. And of those women who came in, 90% of them came with children. There was one story in particular that stuck out at me, of the many that came through. I realize that this is a very complicated issue, and there are rights and wrongs on both sides of the issue. Health. How are we going to provide for all these people? What kind of illnesses do they bring to our country? Employment. Will they come here and take the jobs of Americans? And yet at the same time, we can't find people to do the entry-level jobs of working in hospitality or working in construction. There are issues of education. Who will support the budgets that are required to educate all these people and to train them in a new language? Housing. Where will they live? Will they clog our cities? There is a housing shortage in our country. How can we find space for all these people? The one woman I wish to talk about, her story to me is heartbreaking, but unfortunately, it is not the exception. These stories are much too common. This one woman came to the Humanitarian Respite Center, and as soon as she had gone through the Border Patrol and been released from there, she came in to register. When she sat behind the registration desk, she looked over the shoulder of the woman doing the registration, and she saw a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and she started to bless herself, and she kept saying, mi hijo, my son, my son. And the woman thought this was very strange because the woman had 3 boys with her. And the woman said, well, which one of your sons? And she said, oh no, not this one, my oldest son. And she began to tell her story. Her husband had been killed by the gangs in El Salvador. El Salvador is a failed government, and there are drug gangs, extortion gangs, protection gangs, and no one is safe in the country. Her oldest son had become the man of the house, and it was his responsibility to earn the money for their upkeep. In El Salvador, there is no banking system because the government has failed. Everyone is paid in cash. And when her oldest son was coming home one day, he was robbed. And he got home and he was so angry. And his mom said to him, don't worry, we'll figure out a way to make this work. But whatever you do, don't fight the gangs. The following week, again, coming home after being paid, he was robbed again. Oh, his anger was beyond anything you could imagine. He was so disappointed because his little brothers looked up to him to provide. He was ashamed to face his mom. But again, she said, whatever you do, don't fight the gangs. On the 3rd week, her eldest son did not come home. She called the neighbors. She reached out to those in the community to see if they knew anything. And late that night, she got a knock at her door. And when she opened her door, she found the dismembered body of her son. And attached to his head was a note, if you don't do what we say, we will do the same to your other 3 children. That night, she left for the United States. She walked from El Salvador to Texas and made it to the Border Patrol and came to the Humanitarian Respite Center. When I heard her story, it made me think of my grandmother. At the end of World War I, she left Italy to come to the Americas. My grandparents lived in a little town called Casotto, which was right on the border between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Italy. And in the first days of the war, it was bombed and her home destroyed. My grandfather fought for the Austro-Hungarian Empire and was taken prisoner by the Russians, and while he was in prison, he had nothing to eat but rat meat. When the war was over, they came back to the town and saw that there was no chance of living there. And the doctor in the town told them that there was probably going to be another war in a short period of time. My grandmother was such a strong woman. She wanted a better life for her children. And so she got her husband and they left for the Americas. My grandmother wanted what every woman wants for their children, a better life. How can we say to that woman from El Salvador, sorry lady, you have to go back to El Salvador. Yes, we know the laws. We know the economics, but the right answer here is compassion. To treat people with compassion is what Jesus calls us to do. There are many social issues that are confronting our society today. And I have to be honest with you, I am struggling with the issues surrounding sexual identity. I read voraciously about it. I see both sides. At times, I also see political pandering. I see what appears to be institutionalized hate. I understand the issues of transgender athletes competing in women's sports. I understand the struggle that many people are undergoing. In teaching for 40 years, I have known a number of students who are gay, who are in some same-sex marriages, who struggle with their sexual identity. These students were among some of the kindest, most intelligent, caring people that I have known. They are really wonderful young men and women. Because I still don't understand, I have decided that I will treat everyone with compassion, because that is the way to come to understanding, to open my mind and my heart, so that I can better understand the struggles that they endure. This is not a time for hate, but for mercy. It is not a time to judge, but to understand. It is, as Jesus showed us, a time for compassion. In the gospel today, we learn that we should forgive as we have been forgiven, to be merciful as God is merciful, to be compassionate as our Heavenly Father is compassionate. Thank you for listening to this reflection. If you think it may help someone, please share it with them. God bless.